At sniper training sessions, she was usually dismissed as the Army's Instagram princess, her flawless makeup and perfect hair often overshadowing her deadly accuracy. Too glamorous for real combat, they'd whisper. Until that night in the unforgiving Afghan mountains, when her unit found itself hunted by invisible enemy snipers. The air was thin, the darkness suffocating. Communications were jammed. Hope was fading. At that moment, everyone's gaze turned to the woman they had labeled just for show. But she calmly reached not for her mirror, but for her rifle. So, how did a social media darling suddenly become a guardian angel, detecting sniper positions through sound alone? And how did her silent shots become a symphony of salvation for her unit? This story will make you confront your prejudices. In the heart of Afghanistan's northern mountains, under the pale starlight, the air was razor-thin and bitterly cold. The temperature had dropped to near freezing, and every breath created visible vapor clouds that could potentially give away their position. The U.S. Army's Special Reconnaissance Unit Bravo 6 was on a critical mission to establish an observation post overlooking the strategic Panjshir Valley, where intelligence suggested major enemy movement was planned for dawn. The jagged peaks rose like ancient monuments against the midnight sky, their snow-covered summits glowing eerily in the starlight. The howling wind carried more than just the bite of high altitude. It carried whispers of danger through stone corridors that had witnessed warfare for centuries. Unit leader Captain David Hayes, a 15-year veteran with tours in Iraq and Syria, meticulously studied the terrain through his advanced night vision scope. His weathered face showed the strain of command, knowing that this mission's success could prevent a major terrorist operation in the valley below. Beside him were his most trusted operators, Staff Sergeant Martinez, an expert in mountain warfare who had earned his reputation in the peaks of Pakistan, and Sergeant Collins, a communications specialist who could work miracles with damaged equipment and had saved more than one unit with his technical wizardry. But in this harsh, unforgiving environment, there was always one figure who seemed out of place, Lieutenant Alexandra Storm. She was breathtakingly beautiful, in her mid-20s, with platinum blonde hair that somehow maintained its salon perfection even under a combat helmet, and emerald green eyes that seemed to capture and reflect light even in complete darkness. Her features were so perfectly symmetrical that she looked as if she had stepped straight from a high-fashion magazine cover, even while wearing full tactical gear and carrying lethal weapons. Due to her viral military-themed social media posts, carefully staged photos of her in uniform that had garnered millions of followers, and her massive online presence, she was often referred to as the Army's glamour girl, the combat Barbie, or more cruelly, Lieutenant Lipstick in military circles. Despite consistently ranking in the top 5% for marksmanship accuracy, physical fitness, and tactical knowledge, she was usually assigned to rear positions or given observation-only roles during critical missions. The whispers about her never ceased in the barracks, in mess halls, during training exercises. Her nail polish probably costs more than our monthly MREs. She must have a professional makeup artist on speed dial. First thing she'll do under fire is check if her mascara is running. I bet she uses night vision scopes to check her lipstick. Alexandra heard these whispers and taunts constantly, like background noise that followed her everywhere she went. But she always remained silent, returning to her assigned tasks with professional dignity that impressed some officers and frustrated others who wanted a reaction. Her response to mockery was consistently superior performance, which only seemed to fuel more resentment from soldiers who couldn't understand how someone so focused on appearance could also excel at deadly skills. Her role on this particular mission was officially designated marksman support, which everyone understood was military code for keeping her away from the real action while satisfying diversity requirements and avoiding the bad publicity that would come from leaving behind the Army's most photogenic soldier. When Captain Hayes addressed Alexandra, he would usually offer a patronizing smile and deliver comments like, "Lieutenant Storm, try not to chip a nail out there," or, "Hope the mountain air doesn't mess up that perfect hair," mixing condescension with forced humor that his men would laugh at dutifully. Alexandra would simply nod, offer a faint professional smile, and return to her equipment checks with meticulous attention to detail that rivaled any soldier in the unit. What none of them knew, what Alexandra had never shared with anyone in her military career, was that she possessed an extraordinary auditory ability that had been passed down through 5 generations of her Finnish grandmother's bloodline. It was a gift especially valuable in mountain terrain, where sound behaved in unique and often counterintuitive ways. The ability to detect microscopic sound variations that preceded gunfire, to hear the whisper of bullets before they were fired, to sense the breathing patterns of hidden enemies through acoustic analysis alone. This supernatural hearing allowed her to perceive threat signatures that existed beyond the range of normal human perception. The almost inaudible intake of breath before a sniper squeezed his trigger, the microscopic mechanical clicks of rifle actions being cycled, the faint whistling of wind through scope optics, even the subtle sound differences created by human body heat affecting air density around concealed positions. This ability, which her grandmother Astrid had taught her during childhood hunting expeditions in the remote forests of northern Finland, was called Kuolevainen kuolman ääni, hearing the voice of death. Astrid had learned it from her own grandmother, who had used it to survive the brutal winter war against Soviet forces, when the ability to detect enemy snipers through sound alone meant the difference between life and death in the frozen wilderness. It was a skill once used by her ancestors to survive in the deadly silence of Arctic forests, where wolves, bears, and human enemies all moved like ghosts through snow-covered terrain. Now it was a forgotten heritage that lived on only in Alexandra's enhanced hearing, dormant and unused in the chaos of modern warfare where technology was supposed to replace human intuition. The mission briefing had been conducted at 1800 hours in a secure tent at Forward Operating Base Viper, where maps, satellite imagery, and intelligence reports painted a picture of growing enemy activity in the region. Major General Richardson himself had flown in from Kabul to emphasize the mission's importance. "Ladies and gentlemen," the general had announced to the assembled special operations personnel, "we have credible intelligence that a major coordinated attack is being planned for dawn. Enemy forces are moving weapons and personnel through the Panjshir Valley under cover of darkness. Your job is to establish observation posts on the high ground and provide real-time intelligence on their movements." He had pointed to aerial photographs showing the treacherous mountain terrain. "This is some of the most dangerous territory in Afghanistan. Steep cliffs, limited escape routes, and confirmed enemy sniper activity. But the intelligence you gather could prevent attacks on 3 different coalition bases." Captain Hayes had studied the mission parameters carefully. "Sir, what's our extraction timeline?" "Dawn plus 2 hours, the general replied. "Helicopter extraction from landing zone Alpha. But understand, if you're compromised before then, you'll be on your own until we can get air support in the area." Alexandra had remained silent during the briefing, taking notes and studying the topographical maps with the same intensity as her male counterparts. But she noticed the looks, the eye rolls, the subtle body language that suggested her presence was more political than tactical. The mission began to deteriorate less than 3 hours after insertion. The team had been moving through treacherous terrain for 2 hours, climbing ancient goat paths that required both technical skill and nerves of steel. The elevation was taking its toll. They were operating at over 8,000 feet, where the thin air made every exertion feel twice as difficult. Alexandra had kept pace with the team effortlessly, her fitness level clearly superior to several of the male soldiers who were struggling with the altitude and heavy equipment loads. Her movements were efficient and silent, betraying years of training that went far beyond what her social media presence suggested. They had reached their designated observation point, a rocky outcropping that provided excellent visibility over the valley below, when everything went wrong simultaneously. Satellite communication unexpectedly cut out. Their GPS units began showing error messages, and radio contact with base was completely severed. Captain Hayes checked and rechecked his communications equipment, his frustration growing with each failed attempt to raise anyone on any frequency. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "All our systems can't fail at once." Staff Sergeant Martinez, his breath creating visible clouds in the frigid air, whispered urgently, "Sir, this feels like electronic warfare. Someone's jamming our signals." Sergeant Collins frantically worked on his radio equipment, trying different frequencies and power settings, but could only produce static and electronic noise. "Nothing, sir. Every channel is compromised. It's like someone threw a blanket over all our communications." The team was now completely isolated, perched on a narrow ledge thousands of feet above the valley floor, with no way to call for help or report their intelligence findings. Worse, if they were being jammed, it meant the enemy knew they were in the area. That's when the first shot rang out. The distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle echoed through the mountain peaks, the sound bouncing off stone walls and creating acoustic confusion that made it impossible to determine the shooter's location. The bullet struck a rock formation just meters from their position, sending sharp stone fragments flying through the air. Captain Hayes immediately pressed himself against the rocky wall, his voice urgent but controlled. "Sniper! Everyone take cover! We're compromised!" The team scattered to whatever protection the terrain offered, but their position was fundamentally exposed. They were on a narrow ledge with limited cover, while their attackers had the entire mountainside to use for concealment and firing positions. A second shot followed immediately, this one even closer, the bullet's supersonic crack indicating it had passed between two team members. Staff Sergeant Martinez pressed himself against a boulder, his voice tight with the realization of their situation. "Sir, we're sitting ducks up here. They have us zeroed." A third shot struck the rock directly above Captain Hayes' head, showering him with stone dust and making it clear that the enemy marksmen were not just randomly firing. They were systematically targeting each team member with precision that spoke of professional training and quality equipment. "Multiple shooters," Captain Hayes called out, his command voice maintaining calm despite the desperate circumstances. "At least 3 different positions. They're trying to pin us down while they maneuver for killing shots." The mountain air suddenly felt thinner, not from altitude but from the crushing weight of their tactical situation. They were trapped on an exposed position, under fire from multiple concealed snipers, with no communications and no way to call for support. Each shadow in the rocky terrain could hide death. Each sound could be the mechanical click of a rifle bolt cycling for another shot. Staff Sergeant Martinez tried to identify target positions through his scope, but the darkness and acoustic confusion of the mountain environment made it nearly impossible. "No visual, sir. The muzzle flashes are being concealed, and the sound is bouncing everywhere." Could be anywhere in those rocks. Sergeant Collins had completely abandoned his radio equipment, now gripping his rifle with white knuckles and scanning the darkness for threats he couldn't see. The electronic warfare specialist who could usually solve any communications problem was reduced to being just another soldier trapped in a nightmare scenario. The psychological effect was immediate and devastating. Each team member was paralyzed by the knowledge that invisible enemies had them in their crosshairs, that highly trained snipers were probably adjusting their scopes and calculating wind drift for killing shots at that very moment. All eyes turned to Captain Hayes, expecting leadership and solutions from their experienced commander. But for the first time in his 15-year military career, the captain's face showed something his men had never seen before: pure, helpless desperation. At that moment, in the absolute darkness and deadly silence between rifle shots, all the jokes and prejudices against Lieutenant Alexandra Storm became meaningless burdens that the unit could no longer afford to carry. Terror had descended upon them like an avalanche, crushing their preconceptions under the weight of survival necessity. Captain Hayes whispered urgently into the stone-cold air, "Nobody moves. Stay low, stay quiet, and try to identify firing positions." Staff Sergeant Martinez pressed his eye to his rifle scope, scanning the maze of rocky terrain for any sign of their attackers. "Nothing, sir. They're ghosts. Professional-level concealment." Sergeant Collins had gone completely silent, his usual technical competence replaced by the basic survival instinct of a trapped animal. Then something completely unexpected happened. Alexandra set down her pack with deliberate care and closed her eyes, shutting out the visual chaos of the mountainside. In the freezing mountain air, where every breath was a struggle and every sound could signal death, she began listening to whispers that no one else could hear. The whispers of impending violence, the acoustic signatures of death itself. Captain Hayes was startled and annoyed when he noticed Alexandra's behavior. "Lieutenant Storm, what the hell are you doing? This isn't a meditation retreat," he hissed, his voice mixing surprise with the particular irritation that came from seeing someone appear to lose focus during a life-or-death crisis. Other soldiers began muttering their disbelief. "Is she seriously doing yoga right now? Has she completely lost it? She's going to get us all killed with this new age bullshit." But Alexandra ignored these whispers and taunts completely. At that moment, she was focused only on the acoustic secrets hidden in the mountain air, using abilities that had been dormant throughout her military career, waiting for exactly this kind of moment. Her enhanced hearing detected sound patterns that existed beyond normal human perception. The almost inaudible intake of breath that preceded a trigger pull, the microscopic mechanical sounds of rifle bolts being worked, the faint acoustic disturbances created by human body heat affecting air density around concealed positions. She could hear the subtle rhythm of heartbeats from over 300 meters away, the whispered conversations between enemy spotters and shooters, even the tiny metallic sounds of scope adjustments being made in the darkness. Her ears were tuned to frequencies and volumes that most people couldn't detect, even in laboratory conditions. This was the ancestral ability her grandmother Astrid had taught her during those long hunting expeditions in the remote forests of northern Finland, where survival depended on detecting threats through sound alone. Like predators tracking prey through auditory cues, she was listening to the heartbeat of death itself. Every cell in her body was focused on detecting the acoustic signatures that preceded violence. She had been developing this ability unconsciously for years, but had never been able to use it in her military career, until this moment when traditional tactics and technology had failed completely. The mountain environment actually enhanced her abilities rather than hindering them. The rocky terrain created acoustic channels that carried sound in predictable patterns, and the thin air reduced background noise while amplifying specific frequencies. It was like having a three-dimensional audio map of the entire mountainside. Several minutes passed in absolute silence. The other team members watched Alexandra with a mixture of confusion, fear, and growing desperation. They were expecting her to snap out of whatever breakdown she was having, but instead they saw something they had never witnessed before. Absolute certainty and deadly focus. Alexandra opened her eyes slowly, and the expression on her face was one that none of them had ever seen. Gone was the social media princess, the glamour soldier, the eye candy that command had assigned to their unit for political reasons. In her place was something far more dangerous, a predator who had identified her prey. She turned to Captain Hayes with movements that were fluid and controlled, like a big cat preparing to strike. "I know where they are, Captain," she said, her voice clear and confident despite the howling mountain wind. Captain Hayes's eyes widened in disbelief. "What are you talking about, Lieutenant? How could you possibly know their positions?" The skeptical expressions on the other soldiers' faces had turned to surprise and curiosity, but there was something in Alexandra's voice that made it impossible to dismiss her claims as fantasy or stress-induced breakdown. "3 confirmed sniper positions," she continued with the precision of a targeting computer. "Primary shooter at 11 o'clock, approximately 380 meters, elevated position behind the large boulder formation. He's left-handed, using a suppressed rifle, probably a .308 caliber based on the acoustic signature." Staff Sergeant Martinez stared at her in complete disbelief. "Lieutenant, that's impossible. How could you?" "Second shooter at 2 o'clock, 320 meters, using the cave mouth for concealment," Alexandra interrupted, her voice maintaining that same machine-like certainty. "Right-handed, unsuppressed weapon, larger caliber, probably .300 Winchester Magnum. He's the one taking the long shots." She paused, tilting her head slightly as if listening to something only she could hear. "Third position at 9 o'clock, 450 meters, mobile sniper moving between rocks. He's their spotter, carrying a lighter rifle but calling targets for the others." Sergeant Collins found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "How is this possible? You can't see anything in this darkness." Alexandra looked at him with those emerald eyes that now seemed to glow with inner fire. "I don't need to see them, Sergeant. I can hear them. Their breathing patterns, the sound of their equipment against stone, the way their rifles create acoustic shadows when they move. I can hear their heartbeats." At that moment, the fate of the entire unit was placed in the hands of a young woman they had spent months underestimating and dismissing. The social media princess, who posed for selfies in uniform, was about to become their salvation. "Here's what's going to happen," Alexandra said, her voice taking on the tone of absolute command that made even Captain Hayes listen without interruption. "I'm going to eliminate these threats one by one. When I tell you to provide covering fire, you shoot at the positions I designate. Not because you can see anything, but because you trust me to guide your shots." She moved to her firing position with movements that were both fluid and deadly, like a dancer who had trained specifically to kill. Her rifle seemed like an extension of her body as she adjusted her position, reading wind conditions and calculating distances with instinctive accuracy that spoke of thousands of hours of practice. Her facial expression reflected deep concentration and the activation of senses that most people didn't even know existed. She would pause to listen, tilting her head at angles that optimized her hearing, adjusting her aim based on sounds that existed beyond the range of human perception. "First target," she whispered, her voice barely audible even to the soldiers lying just meters away. 11 o'clock, behind the boulder. He's adjusting his scope right now. Range 380 meters, wind from the left at approximately 8 miles per hour. She made micro-adjustments to her rifle's position, compensating for factors that she was calculating in real time through sensory input that defied explanation. Her breathing slowed to the rhythm used by Olympic shooters, each exhalation precisely timed to the moment between heartbeats when her body was most stable. "He's about to fire," she announced with calm certainty. "Taking the shot now." Alexandra squeezed the trigger with surgical precision, the suppressed rifle producing only a soft pff that was immediately swallowed by the mountain wind. 3 seconds later, they heard the distinctive sound of equipment falling among rocks, followed by absolute silence from the 11 o'clock position. "Target eliminated," she reported with machine-like efficiency, already shifting to acquire her next target. "Second shooter, 2 o'clock. He heard the first shot, and he's repositioning. Wait for it." She held her position for nearly a full minute, listening to sounds that the other soldiers couldn't detect even when they strained their ears to maximum sensitivity. Her rifle tracked slowly across an apparently empty section of mountainside. "Now he's settled," she whispered. "Cave mouth, 320 meters. Larger rifle, so I'm adjusting for different ballistics. Wind has shifted slightly, compensating." Her second shot was equally precise, and again they heard the unmistakable sound of a body falling among rocks, this time accompanied by the metallic clatter of a rifle bouncing off stone surfaces. "Two down," Alexandra continued, her voice maintaining that same mechanical calm. "Third target is the mobile spotter. He's trying to flank us from the left ridge, but he's also calling for backup on a radio." She paused, her head tilted at an angle that suggested she was listening to something none of them could hear. "He's approximately 450 meters out, moving between cover positions. His movement pattern suggests military training. This is going to be more difficult." Staff Sergeant Martinez watched through his scope as Alexandra tracked her rifle across terrain that looked completely empty to his enhanced optics. "Lieutenant, I don't see anything." "Are you sure?" "He's about to stop behind a rock formation," Alexandra interrupted. "When he does, he'll be exposed for approximately 3 seconds while he raises his radio to report our position. That's my window." She held perfectly still for what felt like an eternity, her rifle aimed at empty space, while the other soldiers wondered if the stress had finally broken their Instagram princess. Then, without warning, she fired into the darkness. The shot seemed to disappear into the void, but 5 seconds later they heard a distant scream, followed by the sound of equipment rolling down a rocky slope, followed by silence. "All targets eliminated," Alexandra announced, lowering her rifle and turning to face the stunned expressions of her teammates. "We have approximately 10 minutes before their backup arrives. I can hear vehicles approaching from the valley." The unit stared at Alexandra in complete amazement, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. Staff Sergeant Martinez, a combat veteran with over a dozen confirmed kills, lowered his binoculars with hands that were actually shaking. 3 shots, 3 kills, at ranges I couldn't even see with night vision," he whispered. "How is that possible?" Alexandra's face showed professional satisfaction, rather than the excitement that might be expected after such a dramatic engagement. "I listened to their voices, Sergeant," she said quietly. "Death has a very distinctive sound, once you learn to recognize it." What she had truly listened to was years of overlooked talent, discipline, and training that exceeded anything her social media presence suggested. While everyone saw her as just a pretty face with a large Instagram following, she had been developing abilities that placed her among the most dangerous soldiers in the army. But there was no time for explanations. Alexandra was already packing her equipment with urgent efficiency. "We need to move now," she announced. Their backup is approximately 6 minutes out, and they'll have our position zeroed from the radio call that third shooter got out. Captain Hayes, still struggling to process what had just happened, found his command voice. You heard the lieutenant. Pack it up, we're moving to secondary extraction point. As they began their hasty withdrawal from the compromised position, following Alexandra's lead through terrain that she seemed to navigate by sound alone, Staff Sergeant Martinez caught up to her. Lieutenant, he said, his voice filled with something that might have been awe, I need to ask, how long have you been able to do that? Alexandra glanced at him while maintaining her rapid pace through the rocky terrain. My whole life, Sergeant. But this is the first time anyone let me use it. The extraction was flawless. Alexandra guided them through a route that avoided enemy patrols she could hear long before conventional detection methods would have spotted them. They reached the secondary landing zone exactly on schedule, where extraction helicopters were waiting to take them back to base. During the flight back to FOB Viper, the unit sat in stunned silence, each man processing what they had witnessed and coming to terms with how completely they had misjudged their female teammate. The woman they had dismissed as a social media princess had just saved all their lives with skills that bordered on supernatural. Captain Hayes found himself staring at Alexandra, who was calmly cleaning her rifle as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Lieutenant, he said over the helicopter noise, we need to talk when we get back. Alexandra nodded, but her expression suggested she was already thinking several steps ahead, probably calculating how this mission would change her career trajectory, and whether the Army would finally recognize her abilities or find new ways to marginalize her talents. The post-mission debriefing was unlike anything the officers at FOB Viper had ever experienced. When Captain Hayes submitted his initial report describing Lieutenant Storm's performance, it was immediately classified and forwarded to Special Operations Command Headquarters. Major General Richardson personally flew back to FOB Viper to interview Alexandra about her methods. The conversation took place in a secured briefing room, with recording equipment and several specialists in acoustic warfare present to analyze her claims. Lieutenant Storm, the general began, Captain Hayes has made some extraordinary claims about your performance during last night's mission. I need you to explain in detail exactly how you were able to detect and eliminate 3 concealed enemy snipers in complete darkness. Alexandra had prepared for this moment, knowing that her abilities would either be dismissed as impossible or studied as a potential game-changer for military operations. She chose to be completely honest. Sir, I possess enhanced auditory perception that allows me to detect acoustic signatures associated with human presence and threat behavior. It's a hereditary trait that I've been developing since childhood. She spent the next 2 hours demonstrating her abilities under controlled conditions, correctly identifying the locations of hidden personnel, detecting weapon types by sound alone, and even predicting when test subjects were about to speak or move. The military specialists were astounded. Dr. Sarah Chun, a researcher in human sensory capabilities, later wrote in her classified report, Lieutenant Storm's auditory abilities exceed normal human parameters by factors we haven't previously documented. Her capacity to process and interpret acoustic information approaches supernatural levels. But the most significant moment came when General Richardson asked the question that would define Alexandra's future. Lieutenant, would you be willing to help us develop training programs based on your abilities? We believe you could revolutionize how we conduct special operations. Alexandra's response was immediate. Yes, sir. But I want to be clear about something. These abilities aren't just parlor tricks or unusual talents. They're combat multipliers that could save lives and give our forces significant advantages. I want to be deployed where they can be used effectively, not relegated to observation roles because of my appearance. General Richardson studied her for a long moment, then made a decision that would reshape special operations doctrine. Lieutenant Storm, you're being transferred to the Advanced Warfare Development Center. You'll be working directly with our top tacticians to integrate acoustic detection methods into standard operating procedures. 1 week later, Lieutenant Alexandra Storm found herself standing before a classroom of special operations veterans, Rangers, Green Berets, SEALs, and Delta Force operators who had been assembled to learn about revolutionary new detection techniques. Among her students were some of the officers who had previously dismissed her as the Instagram princess, including Staff Sergeant Martinez and Sergeant Collins from her original unit. The transformation in their attitudes was complete. They now listened to her with the absolute attention that elite soldiers reserve for training that could save their lives. "Gentlemen," Alexandra began, her voice carrying the authority of proven combat performance, "I'm going to teach you how to hear the battlefield in ways you've never imagined. How to detect threats before conventional methods can identify them. How to use your natural sensory abilities as force multipliers." She walked to a large tactical display showing mountain terrain similar to where they had engaged the enemy snipers. Traditional training teaches you to use your eyes and technology to identify threats. I'm going to teach you to use your ears to hear death before it speaks. The training program she developed became legendary within special operations circles. Students learned to detect approaching vehicles by engine harmonics, to identify weapon types by the acoustic signatures of their mechanical actions, to predict human behavior by breathing patterns and heartbeat irregularities. But more importantly, they learned to look beyond assumptions and stereotypes to recognize capability wherever it might be found. During one memorable training session, Staff Sergeant Martinez, now one of Alexandra's most dedicated students, raised his hand during a break in instruction. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying genuine respect that would have been impossible to imagine just weeks earlier, "I need to ask you something personal. Why didn't you ever tell us about these abilities? Why did you let us treat you the way we did?" Alexandra looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Sergeant, would you have believed me if I had told you? Would any of you have taken me seriously? Or would you have just added thinks she has supernatural powers to your list of jokes about the Instagram princess?" The silence in the classroom was profound as every student considered the question and realized the uncomfortable truth it revealed about their own prejudices and assumptions. "Sometimes," Alexandra continued, "the most dangerous enemies are the ones who underestimate you because of how you look, what they think they know about you, or their own preconceptions about what warriors should look like. That moment of their surprise is when you strike with everything you've learned, everything you've prepared, everything you're capable of." She gestured to the tactical display, showing the mountainside where she had eliminated 3 enemy snipers. Those men died because they never imagined that their greatest threat would come from someone who looked like she belonged on a magazine cover rather than a battlefield. The training program continued to evolve and expand, eventually becoming standard curriculum for all special operations units. Alexandra's techniques were credited with preventing dozens of casualties and contributing to successful missions across multiple theaters of operation. But perhaps the most significant change was in how the military approached the assessment and utilization of human capabilities. Alexandra's story became a case study in how prejudice and assumptions could blind organizations to the exceptional abilities that existed within their own ranks. 6 months after the mountain engagement, Lieutenant Alexandra Storm was promoted to captain and awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for her actions. The ceremony was attended by senior officers from across the special operations community, many of whom had come specifically to meet the soldier who had revolutionized their understanding of human potential in combat. During her acceptance speech, Captain Storm said simply, "This medal doesn't just recognize my actions on one night in Afghanistan. It represents the potential that exists in every soldier who has ever been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed because they didn't fit someone's preconceived notion of what a warrior should look like." She paused, looking out at an audience that included soldiers of every background, gender, and appearance. True strength often comes from unexpected places. True courage sometimes wears makeup, and true warriors are found not in our assumptions, but in our willingness to look beyond those assumptions to see what people are really capable of. The standing ovation that followed lasted for 5 full minutes, led by Staff Sergeant Martinez and the other members of Bravo 6 who had witnessed firsthand how dangerous assumptions could be and how extraordinary capabilities could emerge from the most unexpected sources. 2 years later, the acoustic detection techniques developed by Captain Alexandra Storm had been integrated into training programs across all branches of the military. Her methods were credited with saving hundreds of lives and giving American forces significant tactical advantages in asymmetric warfare situations. But perhaps her greatest legacy was the cultural change she had helped inspire. The military began actively seeking out and developing unconventional capabilities, recognizing that the next breakthrough in warfare might come from someone who didn't fit traditional warrior stereotypes. Captain Storm continued to serve with distinction, leading special operations missions where her unique abilities provided decisive advantages. But she also maintained her social media presence, now using it to inspire young people, especially young women, to pursue their capabilities regardless of what others might think about their appearance or potential. Her Instagram account, which had once been mocked as evidence of her unsuitability for serious military service, became a platform for demonstrating that strength, skill, and dedication could coexist with beauty, style, and personal expression. In her posts, she would often write, "Never let anyone convince you that you have to choose between being who you are and being who you're capable of becoming. The most powerful people in the world are those who refuse to be limited by other people's expectations." This story proves how deceptive appearances can be, and that the greatest skills can sometimes emerge from the most unexpected sources. True warriors don't seek fame or recognition. They perfect their craft in silence and strike when lives depend on precision. But it also demonstrates that changing minds requires more than just words. Sometimes you have to save people's lives before they'll listen to what you have to say about prejudice, assumptions, and the danger of judging capability by appearance. Captain Alexandra Storm had done both. She had saved lives and changed minds, proving that the most critical victories are often won not on battlefields, but in the moments when people are forced to confront their own limitations and biases. Share your own story with us. Have you ever been underestimated because of your appearance, or witnessed someone rise when no one believed in them? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters. Like, share, and subscribe to Truth in the Mirror for more inspiring stories of hidden talents and unexpected victories. Hit the bell icon to be notified instantly of our new content.